give us a chance for
Good evening, Earth.
interaction.
This is
I
Adam
just
Sturch
wonder if
broadcasting from the Mushroom
this
Mansion
could be
House,
turned
New
up
Mexico.
here, this,
Working on oil painting
flashing
Medusa's crown tonight.
Thank you kindly.
Alright, I've already got the color mixed up from last time. I've capped it and added a little linseed oil to keep it loose. And I'm just going to continue with the patterning of the first layer of highlights across the background faces.
Of the palliative care unit at Vancouver Hospital, looking after terminally ill people. And then for 12 years I worked in Vancouver's downtown east side, which is, in palliative care we looked after people dying with cancer, dying with ALS, dying with multiple sclerosis, whatever it was. And then I worked for 12 years in Vancouver's downtown east side, which is notorious as North America's most concentrated area of drug use. So in a few square block radius, there are thousands of people ingesting, inhaling, injecting drugs of all kinds, and suffering HIV, hepatitis C, mental illness, and multiple other afflictions. And what I found out over the years is that there's only one thing that's the heart of cancer, that's the heart of multiple sclerosis, ALS. I should also tell you that at age 53 I was diagnosed with ADHD, and I took stimulant medications for some years in treatment. So I became very interested in childhood developmental issues and brain development. And so, to go back, what I found out is that whether it was physical illness, such as the ones I mentioned, or any other physical illness, rheumatoid arthritis, anything else, or addiction, or mental illness of any kind, or the preponderance of childhood developmental disorders that are burgeoning in North America right now, with millions of children being on stimulant medications for ADHD, 500,000 kids in your country are on antipsychotic medications, not because they're psychotic, but because we don't know. When I say we, I mean doctors, teachers, parents don't know how to regulate the child's behavior without medications. And it's an experiment because we have no idea what the long-term effects of antipsychotics will be on the developing brain of the child. I know that in Vancouver, they've had to establish a special clinic at Children's Hospital just to deal with the side effects of the antipsychotic medications, which include diabetes, weight gain, personality changes, skin changes, the whole thing. But this is what we're doing, and the approach always is, somebody gets rheumatoid arthritis, well, what do we do about it? Well, we give them steroid medications, or we give them immune suppressant medications, because in rheumatoid arthritis, the immune system attacks the body. So we want to suppress the immune system so it stops attacking the body of the host. Or with ADHD, what do we do about it? Well, there's something going on in the brain, let's change the chemistry of the brain by stimulant medications, which can make a helpful difference actually. But our response to any of these issues, whether it's physical, mental illness, childhood developmental problems, behavior issues, is always reactive. It's always reactive, like we're reacting to manifestations. So there was a case somewhere in the States, not unusual by the way, where, and this went viral just a few weeks ago, a kid somewhere in the States, 8 or 9-year-old, 10-year-old, is in handcuffs. Is handcuffed by the school security officer. This same thing is happening up in Canada. We're just reacting to the behavior. And with due deference to BK, when he said, well, trauma, let's talk about solutions. That's not my approach at all. When I wrote my book on ADHD, which is the first book that I wrote, the Canadian title was Scattered Minds, a new look at the origins and healing of attention deficit disorder. The American subtitle, the Americans changed the title from Scattered Minds to Scattered, which is kind of an indication of something. The publisher didn't think that the Americans would understand the word minds, I suppose. Only the same publisher published a book on ADHD a few years later called Scattered Minds, just to confuse things. But the subtitle is what's interesting, because my subtitle was A New Look. at the origins and healing. The American subtitle, how ADD originates and what you can do about it. It's this sort of can-do Yankee self-helpism, you know? And I'm saying, for God's sake, just look at it first. Get present to it. Be aware of it. See how it arises. And then, out of that understanding, will come the solutions. As a Hungarian-born, like myself, American psychiatrist Thomas Hora said, when you get the what, then you know the how. And in North America, we're very addicted to the how, but not to the what. We don't really understand things, we don't look deeply enough, we just react to symptoms, behaviors, manifestations that are troublesome, that we don't like, that are pathological, and there's not a look at the source. So here's what I found out, that whether we're looking at mental illness, depression, anxiety, PTSD, ALS, cancer, rheumatoid arthritis, behavior problems, we're looking at one thing only, which is the impact of early childhood stress on the individual. And that stress happens in a social context. And so that the ideology of Western medicine, which separates the mind from the body, which doesn't understand that in rheumatoid arthritis, in ALS, there are physical manifestations of lifelong emotional patterns and early stresses that the disease itself is an outcome of, and that therefore if the individual could change their relationship to their emotions and how they function in the world and how they take on stress automatically and what kind of relationships they're in and what kind of work they're doing and how they feel about themselves, that can actually significantly affect the course of the illness in a positive sense. In other words, if they get present to themselves. Many, many examples of that. But these are the things that my profession, despite a whole preponderance of evidence, absolutely ignores. It just doesn't compute. It's like the Mr. Spock on Star Trek, emotions don't compute. And the medical mind, they don't. Similarly, let's look at just ADHD for a moment. So as I say, I was diagnosed with it in, and I don't have the time to tell you how these early stresses translate into illness. That's a whole other conversation. Except I can tell you that, let me give you a simple example. Let's say you have a 2-year-old, and you're the parent of a 2-year-old, and they get angry with you. Now, incidentally, if your 2-year-old doesn't get angry with you, you're not doing your job. Because she can't have that second cookie before dinner. And why should she not be upset? I mean, when you want something, you don't get it, you get frustrated. Right? She gets frustrated, so But what if you grew up in a home where your father, or mother, was a rageaholic? And so that you're terrified of anger. You can't handle it. It brings up too much anxiety for you. So then you give the signal, overtly or covertly, that good little girls don't get angry. What the child gets is that little girls who get angry don't get loved. So then how does she adapt? She adapts by repressing her anger. That's the way she maintains the relationship with you. Because the fundamental dynamic in human life and the most important factor in the development and existence of human beings is attachment, connection to another human being. As infants, we're utterly helpless, and we're more helpless than any other creature, and stay that way longer than any other creature. So without that attachment relationship, we simply don't function, can't live. It's life essential. And throughout life, of course, we evolved as a species of attachment. By attachment meaning, it's a gravitational force that pulls two bodies together, just like you can really say that love makes the world go round, because love is the common word for attachment. connection, where somebody's taking care of somebody else, somebody's holding somebody else, and somebody's being held. Now, gravitation itself is an attachment force. I'm talking about physical gravitation. It pulls two bodies together. And literally, it's gravitation that makes the world go around the sun, isn't it? So when they say love makes the world go round, it's true in the purest physical sense. Well, it's also true in the psychological realm. So when the love, and by love here, I don't mean the emotion that a parent feels towards the child, because I take it for granted that all parents love their kids. And even hard as it is to fathom, but even the parents who abuse their kids love their kids. They just don't know how else to love them, because they're acting out their own childhood program. So by love in this case, I don't mean the emotion. I mean the capacity to be present with and understand and see the other human being for exactly who they are, and to accept them for who they are, and to invite them unconditionally to be in your presence exactly the way they are. That's what love actually is. And so I can tell you as a parent, I was completely incapable of giving that to my kids, because I was still dealing with my own childhood stuff as an adult. Well, when children don't receive that unconditional, what Carl Rogers called the unconditional positive regard, or the unconditional invitation to be in my presence exactly the way you are, then they have to adapt to that. Why do they have to adapt? Because they need the attachment relationship without which they can't survive. So without attachment, there's no survival. Therefore, we adapt. And if your child at age 2 gets the message that she's not invited to be in your presence when she's angry, then she won't be angry. Not that the anger won't be there, but she'll repress it. It's not a conscious behavior, it's simply an automatic brain mechanism. But when you repress anger, you know what happens in the long term? You're repressing your immune system. Lots of studies have shown that. And the immune system can then fail to function, or it can actually turn against you in the form of autoimmune illness. That's in a nutshell the source of a lot of physical illnesses. Not the only source, but it's a major contributing factor that's utterly ignored in Western medicine, despite reams of evidence. And that's the subject of my book, When the Body Says No. But the first book I wrote, so what I'm saying here is that when there's a loss emotionally, that translates into biology. So it's not that there's biology here and no emotions here. It's that the emotions and the biology are completely inseparable. And what happens on the emotional plane inevitably will have its manifestations on a biological plane. So what you lose emotionally translates into biological events in your body. And that begins with brain development. And I began to be interested in brain development when I was diagnosed with ADHD. I was 53, I think, 54, 53. And it was a typical self-diagnosis. Somebody I knew told me she has been diagnosed and she has to have coffee with me. And 5 minutes into the conversation, I knew why it was with me that she has to have coffee. Because everything she said about herself, the distractibility, the poor impulse control, inability to stay on task unless I was highly motivated, the hyper-focusing to the exclusion of other information when I was highly motivated, my addictive patterns, as I said in my book, my Jekyll and Hyde ways of being with my kids. All this I thought was explained. It certainly was reflected in the description of the ADD persona. Within a couple of months, 2 of my kids were diagnosed, which seemed to go along with the mainstream medical view that what we've got here is a genetic disorder, which I never bought into for a minute. And why didn't I buy into it? Because although I didn't know anything about the brain or how it developed, I knew something. The tuning out, the absent-mindedness that characterizes ADD is not a disease, inherited or otherwise. What is tuning out? What is it? Anybody? Sorry? It's an adaptive response to stress. So that if I were to stress you right now, what I mean by that is to be verbally abusive, emotionally insulting, domineering, you would go into a stress state. And how could you deal with it? Well, you could just walk out the door. Or you could stand up and say, you can't talk to me like that, I will not accept it. And if you couldn't walk out, nor did you have the strength to confront me, to fight back, flight or fight wasn't available to you, there's still a third thing you could do. There are, 100, 200 people here in the room with you, you could ask for help. But what if you couldn't do any of those things? Then how would you handle the stress? Well, you wouldn't. Your brain would handle it by a number of defense mechanisms, the salient of which would be dissociation. You dissociate, all of a sudden you're not here. Now you're not suffering as much. So it's simply a coping response is all it is. So that's what I knew. Well, let me read you a quote from an article in the Journal of Pediatrics that was published in 2012. And it's from the Harvard Center on the Developing Child. And the article is entitled An Integrated Scientific Framework for Understanding Child Development. And here's what they say. Now this article brings together a lot of the research on child development and stress. And here's the salient paragraph. They say, growing scientific evidence demonstrates that social and physical environments that threaten human development because of scarcity, stress, or instability can lead to short-term physiologic and psychological adjustments that are necessary for immediate survival and adaptation, but which may come at a significant cost in long-term outcomes in learning, behavior, health, and longevity. In other words, the way we adapt to early stress helps us endure that difficult period in the life of the helpless child, but those same adaptations become source of pathology, threaten your health, threaten your longevity even. So what's adaptive in one situation, what's meant to be a temporary state, becomes a long-term trait. And when it goes from state to a trait, now it's a source of dysfunction and pathology. So that's what I intuited about the tuning out. But what I didn't know, and this is astonishing, it's not so much that I didn't know it, that wasn't so astonishing, because it wasn't yet, when I went to medical school in the 1970s, this wasn't knowledge yet that was acknowledged and published and freely available. But what I'm able to tell you now, and some of you are probably aware of it already, is how the brain actually develops. And how the brain develops is an interaction with the environment. So that the brain is not genetically programmed. The potentials are genetically set, and the trajectory of development, in terms of what circuits will develop when, that's set genetically, but how they will develop, how successfully they will unfold and connect, and what systems in the brain will become to dominate, that's not genetically programmed. That depends on the interaction of that individual with the environment. So that the physiology of the brain, so when you do brain scans of mentally ill people, ADHD people, addicted people, you can, in the adult phase, you can see typical, or at least frequently occurring brain patterns. And you say, aha, the problem is in the brain. Because here it is, it's an abnormal brain scan. And so the American Society of Addiction Medicine defines addiction as a primary brain disease. primary brain is it arises in the brain. And they say it's 50% at least genetically determined. Utter nonsense. It's not even 5% genetically determined when you actually look at the scientific evidence. Because what they don't get is that what they're looking at in terms of biology in these adult brain scans reflects the child's early experience. That the brain is actually shaped by early experience. So if you take a kid with ADHD and you give him stimulant medications like Ritalin or Dexedrine or Adderall, such as I took for a few years, what we're trying to do is to elevate the level of a chemical in the brain called dopamine. Dopamine is essential for incentive and motivation. Dopamine, incidentally, is what all the stimulants give you. So guess what? Cocaine addicts, nicotine addicts, caffeine addicts, crystal meth addicts, many of them are looking for that hit of dopamine to make them feel more alive and present. It's a self-medication. Well, that's what we give to ADHD kids. No, you take infant monkeys and you measure their dopamine levels and then you separate them from their mothers. You know what you find? Within a week, their dopamine levels fall way down. You isolate monkeys or rats and the number of dopamine receptors diminish. You put people in isolation, their dopamine function diminishes. We make people crazy by putting them in isolation. We're actually messing with their brains because the brain is responsive physiologically to the psychosocial environment throughout the lifetime. The most so as children, but it's a fact throughout life. And so that to look on human beings as separate entities and then as illnesses, as the problems in a separate organ in the human body is scientifically absolute nonsense. And this is how medicine is practiced. And so we know, for example, that children whose parents are stressed are much more likely to have asthma. A study here in California. In polluted areas, of course, there's more asthma, but it's the children whose parents are more stressed who are most likely to get the asthma. In other words, the parents' emotions themselves program the lung physiology of the child, if you can get that. So that human beings are biocycle. I won't go into the mechanisms of it, except to tell you that if you've been treated for asthma, you might know this, but the medications we give for asthma, you know what they are? Steroids and a copy of adrenaline. We treat asthma with stress hormones. To open a kid's lungs or an adult lungs, we give them adrenaline to open their airways and steroids to suppress inflammation. Adrenaline and steroids are manufactured by our adrenal glands on top of our kidneys in response to stress. And what's happened with these kids is that they've been overstressed by the stress of their parents. Their stress mechanism has been exhausted. Now we have to give them extra stress hormones to keep their airways open. And by the way, steroids, cortisol is the commonest medication that we use in rheumatoid arthritis, colitis, multiple sclerosis, dermatitis, psoriasis, eczema, conditions of the lung, scleroderma, multiple sclerosis. We give people infusions or ingested cortisol, stress hormone. Do you think we might pause for a moment and say, my gosh, is it possible that something's happened to the stress mechanism of these people? And is that possible, therefore?
All right, well, that gets the lower right and central lower section blocked in pretty well.
And that originates.
I think I'm going to cut that there. Feed my cat and watch a movie and call it a day.
We just go ahead and, okay, here's the problem, here's the solution. Because we're not looking.
All right.
So
that's Adam Sturch broadcasting from the Mushroom Ranch in Taos, New Mexico, working on oil painting Medusa's crown.
From the Harvard Center on the Developing Child.
Have a good night, Earth.
And they talk about brain development. And I'm not going to go into the details of how this happens, but I'm just summing up for you. The architecture of the brain is constructed through an ongoing process that begins before birth, continues into adulthood, and establishes either a sturdy or fragile foundation.